Hello, my name is Allison Fay. I serve as the director of the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, a program of Zero Abuse Project. This is going to be a short overview webinar about talking about touches, especially geared for those in healthcare settings or in other professional settings who are expected to have, whether it's a well child checkup or if they're doing some type of, like officer safety presentation in the school. Just a brief overview about how we talk about touches in a way that's empowering and isn't scary and encourages kids to have conversations with people in their lives that they may need to have. And so we always want to remind our viewers or the people who are engaged with our content that we believe it's a kid's job to be a kid and it's the grown-up's job to keep them safe. We can give children information about their bodies. We can give them the right words to talk about their bodies. We can give them empowering message about their bodies. It's still not their responsibility to end the cycle of abuse. They are children. We need to be nice to them. They don't have as many resources, and there's so many reasons why children don't tell. So just as a word of just professional awareness that, to not make the assumption of, well, I've had this conversation with this child, so now they will tell. That's not how it works. We have these conversations with kids, with adults, with professionals, so that if they see warning signs in a friend and someone in their family, if there's a concern, they know that it's not their fault and they can tell. That doesn't mean that that does not guarantee that they will tell. There's so many myths when it comes to talking about abuse, and in this context, the one myth that I think is important to just dissect right at the beginning here is that sense of people having an aversion to talking about body safety for a fear of, I've had parents say things like, well, I want to protect my children's innocence longer, so I don't want to have this conversation. And I think we need to think about personal safety the way that we do all other kinds of safety. We don't wait on talking about bike safety because we don't want to talk about what a traumatic brain injury looks like. That's not helpful, empowering, or accessible. We just say, you know what, it's our family safety rule that we wear bike helmets when we're biking. So now that we know that that's what our expectation is, let's have conversations about what might happen if you're at a friend's house, they want to go biking and you don't have a helmet. Let's talk about why it's important to look both ways. But you know what, even if you're feeling unsafe or scared about bicycle helmets, I want you to come and talk to me about it. So it's the same kind of thing. We don't have to get in worst case scenarios. We want kids to be smart and not scared, but it's a big part of, we want children to get information about their bodies from people who care about them and want them to be safe. And so we want to help encourage people to have those important conversations. We talk to kids about that uh-oh feeling. It's not, do we know them or not? That's no longer the question or the concern. Most abusers are people that the child knows and likes. So it's not, do we know them? The question is, how does this person make me feel, and what is this person asking me to do? If this person is giving me that uh-oh feeling, that mixing bowl in my tummy, or that roller coaster ride that isn't fun, I can go and talk to someone else who doesn't make me feel that way. And so thinking about those questions shifting from, do we know them or not, and instead, how do they make me feel and what are they asking me to do? If they're asking me to do something that's against body safety rules, it's not my fault. It has nothing to do with me, and I'm allowed to ask someone who does know the rules about bodies and about safety. We teach kids to build safety nets of 5 different adults that they can tell if they have a problem or a question about safety, because sometimes it's a person on the net who doesn't know the rules or is ignoring the rules. We have 4 more people to tell. And so helping kids build those safety nets, and then also putting the responsibility on the adults and saying, who are the 5 kids that you can be a safety net for as kids have questions about safety. When we talk about touches, that's one of the phrases that we use. In our family, we talk about touches. In our family, we know the names of our private parts. We know that private parts are different from the rest of your body, and kids have a right to say no to anyone asking them to do something against their rules or against their uh-oh feeling. I often use a sports analogy with kids, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, in the sense of, have any of you ever played sports with an adult who didn't know the rules? And we talk about how it's really hard to explain rules to a grown-up when you're a kid. And so if you're playing with a grown-up, and this also obviously works for kids of any age, but if you're playing with someone and they don't know the rules, You don't have to be the one to explain the rules to them if you're feeling, you know, that uh-oh feeling going off, or if there's someone who's older than you or you're just feeling uncomfortable. You can get out of that situation and find someone who does know the rules and let them have those conversations. We shouldn't put kids in the position of having to defend themselves against adults. It's adults' job to keep kids safe. So that idea of if you meet someone who doesn't have the same rules about bodies, or has never learned the rules about bodies, and is trying to do a touch that makes you feel that you know you have questions about, you don't have to explain the rules about touches. You can just get out of that place and go find someone who does know the rules. And so that kind of alleviates some of that sense of kids being concerned about having to explain the rules. We also don't use good touch, bad touch anymore for a variety of reasons. One of which is that kids who have been touched in a way that, if they've been taught that curriculum, they've been touched in a way that makes them, they're not sure if it's bad or good, they might want to hide the behavior if they've worried that they've been bad. And so we just take that sort of, and we also know that a lot of touch does feel good, so that's confusing for a child if their body's responding and all of those dynamics. So it's just, we talk about touches. And the child doesn't have to figure out if it's good or bad. If, you know, if someone is touching or attempting to touch a 5-year-old's private parts, they don't have to decide if that's good or bad. They're allowed to say no, move away, and tell someone. If they don't move away, it's still not their fault. I just want to add that little caveat here, because I hear from so many kids things like, well, I did it wrong. I'm supposed to say no. I'm supposed to run away. My parents told me to do that. And when it was this person I knew and liked, I just froze. I think when we're talking about safety with kids, to bring up in our what ifing, you know, what if our body just freezes up? Sometimes our body freezes up to keep us safe, and that's still not your fault. You can still tell me and I still won't be mad. And so again, to put the onus on the adult and not on the child. With little ones, you know, I want you to check in with one of your safety net adults. If anyone's trying to touch or look at private parts, wants you to touch, look at their private parts, is asking you to touch their own private parts. And then we can use those moments to have conversations about clean and healthy touch. There are times when grown-ups do touch kids' private parts to keep them clean and healthy. But if it's clean and healthy, we can tell anybody we want, and we can ask a lot of questions. And so, you know, we talk a lot about using what ifs as a way to process safety. We teach the rule and we follow it up with a what if. And so that it's not just the rule going in one ear and out the other, but kids are processing, you know, okay, so what if the person who's watching you doesn't know the rules about bodies and they ask if they can play a game where they touch your private parts? And then having a conversation about what could be some of the steps that we could do there. And, you know, if the person, and then we use that clean and healthy example. You know, what if the person watching you is giving you a bath and they are keeping you clean and healthy? Well, they're giving you a bath. I want to know if they're touching your private parts, because I want to make sure that we have a conversation, that we know that we talk about touches, and I can work and figure, you know, we can talk about it and figure out if it was clean and healthy or not. I hope that makes sense. It's so hard to do webinars when you don't have the visual cues of the nodding and the people understanding. So if anything I say today, you need more clarification, feel free to email me. My email will be on the last slide. But just that sense of, I don't, you know, the message isn't, if you go to a doctor's office, they'll always do clean and healthy touches. That's not the message. The message is, you know what? Sometimes when you're at the doctor's office, they might need to touch your private parts to keep you clean and healthy. And if it's a clean and healthy touch, we can talk about it. We can ask questions about it. There aren't any secrets about clean and healthy touch, and we can figure it out together. It shouldn't be on a child's shoulders to figure out if a touch at an office or a touch by a provider is clean and healthy. That's something, check in with me. If someone touched your private parts, let's figure out together if it's clean and healthy. We can use examples about like diapering a sibling or helping with toileting as an example of a clean and healthy touch that we tell anybody we want to about it, and that's never a secret. And so kids can have that sense of, we check in about any private part touch and ask if you have any questions. Just when we do our Empower Me class in the schools, we talk about touches, and we use that example of, you know, clean and healthy touches are never a secret. And if you have any questions, you can talk to one of your 5 adults. And I think back to a time training in 3rd grade and a girl raising her hand and telling about a time where a bee had stung her in the bottom. And she said, you know, I know that my bottom is a part of my private parts. The bee stung me and my friend's parent pulled the bee out. Was that clean and healthy? We had a great conversation about, well, thanks for asking me, because we talk about touches and we can ask questions if we're not sure, and or if we're just checking in. And so did that feel clean and healthy? And yep, it only hurt my bottom. And as soon as the bee was out, it felt clean and healthy. And, you know, me following up with, you know, were you allowed to talk about it? Yep, they called my parents that had been stung by a bee, got an ice pack. We all talked about it together. And I was able to say, well, that sounds like a clean and healthy touch, but I'm really glad that you asked, because if you're not sure, you can always ask. And then again, to reiterate that message, if someone does trick you into a touch that you're confused about, it is not your fault. You can always tell. Kids will often come up with, oh, I did it wrong. And it's like, you didn't do anything wrong. You can always tell. And if it's one of your 5 adults who's breaking your body safety rules or is making you feel confused or scared, you can ask one of your other adults on your net. And kids should be told they have a right to say no to touches, even if it is someone they know, because that is the more likely scenario. So just that empowerment of, you're allowed to say no, someone doesn't know the rules about safety, then come check in with me anytime you have to say no to an adult, so that I can, or an older kid or anyone, so that I can then figure out what happened and what they know about safety. You know, I use the example of, you know, if you're in a rural area and you're walking home from school, a neighbor, a well-meaning neighbor might drive up and say, I'll give you a ride the rest of the way home. But if your family safety rule is, you know what, we check first before we get in the car with anyone, we move away from the car and say, no, I'm going to go check first. We go check in with our parent. We say, oh yeah, the neighbor was going to give me a ride home, but I said no, because that's against our rules. And it doesn't mean that the neighbor's a bad person, or is, you know, it doesn't have all those layers that kids are trying to unpack. They just may not know what our family safety rules are. And one of the many reasons kids don't disclose is they're worried what's going to happen to the other person. So instead of having it be very focused on punishment, having it be focused on communication. You know what? Different families have different rules, and then they might not have ever been taught rules about bodies. And so if you're playing with another kid and they want to touch private parts, let's talk about that before that, you know, if that happens, and I won't be mad at you and it's not your fault. Having a family safety night is just a great model to get together, and that's something that, especially in healthcare, you can provide resources for families about, you know, sitting down and talking about bike helmets and safety belts. At the same time, we talk about touches and body safety and internet safety. We want to encourage kids that the difference between telling and tattling. Telling is saying something to get someone into, tattling is saying something to get someone into trouble. Telling is saying something to get someone out of trouble. And encouraging kids, they have a right to tell whenever hurting is happening, that that's past their pay grade and they can ask for help. As I said earlier on, we use a lot of what ifs to help kids process safety rules, and what ifs can also be that opportunity to reinforce some of those messages of, I would want to know if someone broke your rules, and I wouldn't be mad at you, and you wouldn't be in trouble, and I want to always help you feel safe. And some of those messages that, because kids will say, well, I don't know what would happen if I would tell. So one of the things with what ifs is we can reinforce, you know, if you or a friend is ever dealing with someone who doesn't know about bodies and touches, you can come tell me and I won't be mad at you, and I would want to know, and I would want to do what I can to help. Our biggest prevention piece is involved parents and caring adults and building those nets. It's not just for the kid to find their 5 people, but for us to be looking for kids who are falling through nets and making sure that we surround all kids with support. On our Zero Abuse Project website, we do have a brochure called Talk About Touches with kind of the parent script. So if that's something in your office, if you're a professional and you're wanting to have something for people to bring home as a resource, that's something that you can order there. And there's more information about all of our online and personal safety brochures, but one of them is the Talk About Touches. And here's my contact information. As I said before, this is a brief overview, just sort of a sense of how we have these conversations, and we have more additional learning throughout other webinars. If you're interested in learning more about this particular topic, the Empower Me overview for parents gets into it in a much more detailed and slower paced way. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope that we can continue to provide resources that are helpful to everyone who is looking out for the best interest.